Welcome to another episode on my channel. My name is Ibukun, and here we simplify legal terms and legal concepts for everyday people to relate with. Today's topic is going to be arbitration, conciliation, and mediation. These are alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, and we're going to be looking into how they apply in Nigeria. Quick disclaimer as always, I am a lawyer, but I'm not your personal lawyer, and the information that I share is simply for knowledge and not to be taken as creating a client-lawyer relationship. Now, what is arbitration and what is conciliation? Well, simply put, these are mechanisms that are used to resolve disputes otherwise than going to a law court or court of law in Nigeria. What is arbitration, conciliation, and mediation? All these three require that there's a neutral third party appointed to help you resolve your issue or your dispute. But the difference would be that in arbitration, that neutral third party has powers to come up with a final judgment called an arbitral award, and that judgment can be enforced and both parties have to comply. Now, with conciliation, both parties are pushed and encouraged towards a resolution. There is no final award given, but the parties come to an agreement with the help of a neutral third party. With mediation, there are terms drawn up by this third party stating what the wishes and the desires of the parties are, and there's a push towards the parties signing it and agreeing to comply to that. So there's slight distinctions, but these three essentially involve a neutral third party helping you resolve your conflict. The process of ADR is such that the parties have to agree on how their proceeding is going to go, and that starts with choosing who the neutral third party is going to be, whether that's an arbitrator, a conciliator, or a mediator. The differences usually are in the procedure that is taken. Once parties have agreed on who is going to be presiding over their case, then they have to decide on the laws that will be applied. If it's in Nigeria, of course, then it's the Nigerian law, and the Arbitration Act, is going to apply, unless, of course, the parties have agreed otherwise. So in this procedure, there's a lot of parties coming together to do things together to encourage them to move forward in resolving their conflict. It's the same way with conciliation. You have a third party that helps you move towards getting to a resolution. With mediation, there's no final verdict passed by the neutral third party. It's just helping the parties write down what they want, what they expect, what they agree to, and getting them to move towards accepting that and complying with that. In conciliation, it's that the parties conciliate, and so that's like resolving the matter together. The parties are encouraged to discuss, come to an agreement, and in arbitration, an award is given. It's called an arbitral award. It's the final decision, and then you can go to a court to enforce it. Usually, for international judgments, international arbitration awards, they are final and they will only be enforced by the court of law. But under the law in Nigeria, you can question what the arbitral award is, and so you can still go to court and litigate and try and reverse the judgment that you've gotten in arbitration. But these proceedings are faster, they are private, you're allowed to call witnesses and get evidence. Lawyers can be used, but you could also just be the parties sitting down and coming together. So it can also be cheaper for you as a means of resolving your conflict. So think about this. If you're a company, if you're a person that has a contractual obligation, even family matters are resolved through ADR. So there are many matters that can come under this, if it's contractual, if it's tortious. And depending on what your dispute is, if it's something that can be resolved by accord and satisfaction, the courts have actually said that mediation will be the way that you should go. So even though we cannot always use ADR methods to resolve all conflicts. For example, if it's criminal, then in the system that we have, you cannot arbitrate or mediate on it. But if it's something that can be resolved by accord and satisfaction, which is the test for whether something can be arbitrated, you would be able to resolve your conflict otherwise than by going to a court of law. Simple matters that do not apply to whether it's your status on the Constitution, not a crime. So matters that are not complex can definitely be resolved by ADR. So I strongly encourage you to consider or reconsider litigating that matter and refer it to the Multidoor Court House in your state or to ADR as you have decided between you and the other party. The law under which this is being practiced is the Arbitration and Conciliation Act of 1988. Other than the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, we have the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law. They have a model law that they brought up in 1985, and that law, it's called the UNCTRAL Model Law on International Commercial Arbitration. So this is also a law that has impacted how arbitration is practiced in Nigeria. The Arbitration Law of Lagos that applies to parties that are in Lagos or contracts performed in Lagos, unless of course, like I've said, the agreement otherwise states, then parties would be bound by the Arbitration and Conciliation Act of 1988. The jurisdiction of the tribunal that is constituted is going to be decided by the tribunal itself. That's what the law says. Courts are usually very reluctant to intervene in arbitration, but there are times when, like I've said, parties can go there for it to be set aside, but they would not usually try to decide whether the tribunal has jurisdiction over the subject matter at hand. Now, there are certain things that cannot be subject to arbitration, such things as taxation law, such things as the revenue of the government, or where you're trying an interpretation for the Constitution. Criminal matters cannot be arbitrated. Matters that have to do with title to land or public policy matters. These matters are not matters that can be subject to arbitration. So this is something to note. There's something called the seat of arbitration, which is usually in the contract, but the place where the hearing is had usually is once the tribunal is constituted, whether it's a one-man tribunal or a three-man panel, they will decide where the hearing should be. Usually it's just to be a convenient place and a quiet, private place. Note that arbitral awards are private, arbitration proceedings are private, and unless you go to court to set it aside, everything that happens there is not in the public sphere. So that has good and bad consequences. So it's important that the arbitrators show that they have no conflict of interest and that they're going to act towards the parties equally. There is a party to the New York Convention, and contracting parties are allowed to enforce arbitral awards in their jurisdiction in Nigeria. So that cannot be set aside in a court of law, but arbitral awards that are given in Nigeria can be. The other things to note are that the powers of the arbitrators that have been selected, they can hear evidence, they can decide the proceedings for the arbitration, and they can decide the venue. So they have a lot of powers as to how the proceeding goes. They are also expected to treat parties fairly and equally, hear the evidence. And so the procedure usually is that the parties get a notice of the arbitration, both sides get to submit their briefs, and then there is a publication of what the award is going to be. The award can be anything that is a relief under law, so it can be an injunction, it can be cost, and the cost for the arbitral proceedings will be covered by both parties, or it should be as agreed. That is it by the party that wins or the party that loses, depending on what the agreement has already said. I hope this has given you a good knowledge of what ADR is, and I hope that the mechanisms that are available will be something you consider when you have a dispute. Do not be in a hurry to go and file a case in a law court. As always, subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed the content. Do like the video, share it with your friends and family, and I'll catch you in my next one.